Welcome to Embrace the Dark and the Light, a podcast about healing, identity, purpose, and being human. I'm your host, Kelly Street, a therapist, writer, and lifelong seeker. I believe that healing isn't linear. Darkness isn't something to fear, and the journey inward is the most important one we'll ever take. Each episode, I explore the full spectrum of what it means to live a conscious, intentional life, from the messy and tender to the sacred and expansive, through a mix of solo episodes and honest conversations with fellow creators, healers, and thinkers. We'll walk together through the shadow and the light, trusting that both have wisdom to offer. You're not alone in this. Welcome to Embrace the Dark and the Light. Hello, here I am. The last time I recorded an episode, I was pregnant. And quite honestly, after 10 years of infertility and the sickness and stress that I felt throughout my pregnancy, I realized that I didn't really want to share that time with anyone. And not only did I not want to, I couldn't. I didn't feel like I had the resources, the strength, the ability to speak or show up in the way that I wanted to. And so I didn't. I let myself take a break over the last 8 months. And so a lot has happened since I last showed up here on the podcast. A baby arrived, a book arrived, and something in me that I don't quite have the words for yet, that arrived too. So here we are. So let's begin, as we do, with a little bit of a grounding. Before we go anywhere, I want to take a moment to arrive wherever you are, whether you're in your car, on a walk, folding laundry. I want you to feel the surface beneath you, the ground, the seat, whatever's holding you right now. Take a breath, not a performative one, just a real deep breath. Feel your feet, feel your hands. Notice what's tight, what's heavy, what's asking for your attention. You don't have to fix any of it. Just notice. We're going to talk today about transformation, about what happens when life reshapes you. And that kind of conversation lands better when you're actually in your body for it. So just take another deep breath wherever you are and land here in this moment in your body. I don't know entirely how to describe what the last 6 months were. I was pregnant. I had a baby. And then I existed in the fog of postpartum for almost all of the last 4 months. I went back to work and started seeing clients a couple of weeks ago. And over the last couple of months, I've tried to record a few times. But each time I would set aside to do that, something would get in the way, something would come up. And so the baby came in December. The baby came later than I thought he would, but he arrived right when he was supposed to. And actually, the baby arrived. This is so fascinating to our family, but my dog Winston, whom I have had since he was a brand new little puppy, he and the baby share the same birthday, which is just wild because for the last 13 years that I have had Winston, I have thought of him as my baby, as my child, essentially. And so it's just wild that he and this baby decided to arrive on the same day. We actually thought maybe there would be a coming in of one and a going out of the other. And so far that hasn't happened. Winston is still around. But it is just really interesting, the symbolism of how that came to be. So with this first arrival of the baby came that beautiful message of this, you have your one baby, and now this baby that I have been waiting for a decade comes in on the same day. But with it also came a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear that I didn't expect to have. I thought I was really going to be just so in love, have so much joy, feel so healed, be so excited. And I was all of those things, but I was also scared. And I was also so afraid of doing it all wrong. And the things that did go wrong or that were hard, I didn't expect. And so that took me months to to really start to come to terms with. And I'm still working through those things. The second arrival is the book, Embrace the Dark, Heal and Find Balance in Life's Deepest Shadows. That came out almost 2 weeks ago. And that came out after about a 4-year gestation, like a 4-year pregnancy period with that book from the time I wrote it until the time it came out. And the arrival of the book came in a lot more quietly than I expected. I had less to give the book's arrival than I had hoped for, than I expected. When I first heard the publishing date, I thought, perfect. I'll be just coming out of postpartum. I'll be out of my 4th trimester. I'll have had the baby, so I'll have time and energy and I'll be able to give myself to it. And surprise to probably no one who has had a baby or experienced a newborn is I didn't have that time and energy. So the arrival came and it was real and present. And I had a beautiful celebration at the local bookstore in town. But it was also a lot quieter around the arrival of the book. And then came the third arrival, which is still arriving. It is still coming. The third arrival is the version of me that doesn't have a name yet. And it's overwhelming, scary to say that I don't know who I am yet on the other side of what comes next. I don't know who I am yet on the other side of either the baby or the book. Because honestly, there is a thing where I was creating and working on this book for 4 years. And now it's out. And I almost feel like a piece of me is out in the world and it's vulnerable and scary and I don't know what to do with it. So that's where I've been. These 3 things that have come into the world while I've been off the mic. And it was sort of a hiatus, but I think I need to think of it more as a becoming. And I'm going to talk more about becoming in an upcoming episode because there was something that came to me almost a year ago, actually probably about a year ago now. And that was the word of the year for me last year. And then how that shifted, how that came about and came into the year for me for this year. But I'll talk about that in a future episode. Now, the real topic for this week's episode, these 3 arrivals. And the biggest of these is matrescence. This is a concept that I hadn't been familiar with before, but now I think is a concept that feels right for where I'm at. So matrescence is the term that developmental scientists use for the psychological, neurological, and identity transformation of becoming a mother. This term, matrescence, was originally coined by the anthropologist Dana Raphael back in the 1970s, and then it didn't really get any play, but it was brought back into the conversation by someone called Dr. Alexandra Sachs. Matrescence is real, it's documented, and it's almost completely absent from mainstream conversations about motherhood. I learned about matrescence by randomly coming across it and coming across Dr. Alexandra Sachs' TED Talk on matrescence. So in the TED Talk, she says a couple of things that really stuck out to me. The first of which is matrescence sounds similar to adolescence because they are both kind of a transformational process. They're a liminal space that we go in, that we go through. And another thing from her TED Talk is she says, when a baby is born, so is a mother. That deeply resonated for me, but it also caused some incongruence in me. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. But first, when I think about this arrival, this liminal space that I'm in, I think about in matrescence, the parts of myself that I'm grieving. There are things that come up in this new version of me. Part of adolescence is going from being a child to an adult. And in that space, you have to, and you see kids do this, you see teens do this. They sort of get angry. They go through a period of mourning for the child that they are. They experience some regression, and then they move into the next phase. And in matrescence, I feel like I'm doing the same thing. There are parts of myself that I'm grieving. I no longer feel like I have full access to my brain, and that is really, really hard. I've always been a learner, a reader, a deep diver, a thinker, a talker. And I don't have the space to read, to learn, to grow that I once did. The other thing that I'm grieving that feels really big is my husband and I, our family, we used to travel a lot. And travel feels a little out of reach. It feels a little scary right now. And so we don't have trips planned. We had to cancel a trip during my pregnancy because it felt unsafe to travel. And so I'm grieving the loss of that connection point for us, that family time. So in this space, there are things that I'm letting go of, and not just these old parts of me, but I also have to grieve and let go of an identity that doesn't quite fit anymore without knowing this new one that is not yet fully formed. I'm in this liminal space of who am I now? Who am I now being the person that I was who had a child half time and who had all this freedom and space. And now I don't. Now I am connected to, tied to a baby, a child whom I also love incredibly deeply, but that I don't have the space that I had. So who am I now? I'm sitting in this liminal crack between who I was and who I'm becoming. And that experience of the liminal, that experience we all can understand. Every single one of us, every person has moved through a major threshold and found that you can't quite go back. You can't quite become who you were. And all we can do is we can pause, we can look back, we can integrate while we move forward. So I remember while I was pregnant, I was having a conversation with my friend Sarah. She warned me that the version of me I was before the baby would die and I would need to be reborn. And so I put that in my back pocket and I thought, okay, yes. She said, and as you're going through birth, like the version of you were will die. And in that moment, there's this threshold of you're so close to, the veil is so thin, you're so on the edge of life and death. And you'll need to be reborn in that moment just as your child is born. And to go back to earlier when I said that there's some part of matrescence that brings up discomfort in me, is that I have already felt like a mother for the last almost 11 years since I met my husband and he had his daughter. And so I am now calling this not becoming a mom, but motherhood 2.0, which that has been a really interesting and in some ways painful part of this. Who am I now? Is that the world now sees me as a mother, whereas the world didn't necessarily see me as a mother before, which has been really interesting. Is that friends, family members, other, clients have all said, wow, what is it like now to be a mom? And I've kind of thought, well, I've been a mom for the last decade. I've gone through periods of who will I be as this child's mother to my stepdaughter. And so it's been really interesting to see that the world only sees me as a legitimate mother because I bore a child, because I went through pregnancy and birth. And that has caused a whole other layer of this reconciling to come about in my matrescence. Because here's an interesting thing about matrescence and this motherhood 2.0 is that I can distinctly remember all of these things that happened to me as my husband and I got married and brought me in as her second mom. Not that she called me second mom, but as another mother and called me mom, is that I went through this period where I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know how to do my makeup. I didn't know how to do my hair. I felt all of this pressure to be like au naturel because her mom does not wear makeup or does she do her hair. I thought I also have to be this way. And so I remember I did all this shopping because I was like, okay, is this what a mom wears? Can I wear this to school? Who am I here? And I went through a real kind of dark period of not knowing who I was anymore because I went from a single 29-year-old, 28-year-old, to the span of a year, having this little girl, being mother to this little girl and feeling like I didn't know what that made me. So that's all to say, I am in this liminal space of matrescence. I don't know what comes next, but I'm showing up anyway. I'm doing this anyway. Even in the confusion of the liminal, I'm trying to practice what I preach and still show up. So I want to come back to the book now. Embrace the Dark came out as of recording this about 2 weeks ago. And as I have already said in Matrescence and in post-birth of the baby, I have been sitting a lot with the shadow. I have been going to these deep places, even alongside the joy and the excitement, and really holding those two contrasting ideas at once. It's been really interesting, the publishing of the book, because I've gone through a whole dark night of the soul in publishing a book about a dark night of the soul. I have had tons of issues and snafus and difficulties come up. I've had lots of shadow parts of myself that I've had to face. Like my Instagram, my business Instagram and personal Instagram accounts were falsely suspended and shut down, and I'm still waiting for them to be opened back up, and I'm trying for that. I have had issues with the publishers having issues with Amazon sending orders out on time, and so people are waiting to get their book where they ordered it months ago and then still didn't get it for a couple of weeks after their order. So I've had all of these little snafus, all of these little things that happened. Oh, the week that the book came out, 2 days before the book was out, I had no voice. I could not speak and had to go on vocal rest for 72 hours so that I could have a voice for my book party and so that I could talk about the book. So it was just this crazy dark night reconciliation, having to be disoriented, feeling humbled, not being sure of what would happen or what came out of it. That was part of me publishing and birthing this book into the world. So during the last 6 or 8 months, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to actually embrace the dark. It literally being the title of my book. I went through it by having the baby and being in the postpartum experience and realizing that I was back at the beginning of my own healing process, back again facing some things that I thought I had worked through. And that's exactly right. That's how it always works. You think you've learned something, and then life just hands you a new version of the same lesson with higher stakes and less sleep. At least in my case, less sleep. So I'm here. I'm at the beginning again, and I'm bringing you along with me on this journey, because that's what this podcast has always been. I've tried to have it be footnotes on a life in progress. So welcome back. Thanks for being here. Thanks for waiting. And I'll see you next time. And remember to keep embracing both the light and the dark. Thank you for being here and for walking this path with me. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love it if you'd take a moment to rate, review, or share it with someone who might need it too. To keep the conversation going, come say hi on Instagram at Embrace the Dark and the Light. And if you're looking for more support on your healing journey, you can find free resources, meditations, and so much more at embracethedarkandthelight.com. Until next time, may you honor the dark, trust the light, and keep coming home to yourself.